IVM.
Hello, we're Team Explainer. Welcome to an all-new episode of Press Decode, a weekly podcast where we take Explainer's mission to declutter the news one step further. Check out our newsletter for more stories and follow us at ExplainerIn to keep up with all the fun things we plan for our Explainer fam. So sit back, relax, and don't let the news give you the blues. I'm Vagda, your host for the day, and we're finally back to a full house with Sara and Prafula. As always, in our big story, we're taking stock of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In our Food for Thought segment, we're taking a look at the great garbage cleanup project in the world's oceans. And then in our final segment, we'll be roasting and toasting our fave and least fave items. All right, let's begin with our big story. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is still the biggest story in the world right now. Let's start with a catch up on what is happening on that front. Since the invasion, Russian forces have launched missiles and artillery attacks, dropping powerful bombs on residential areas of Irpin near Kyiv, Mykolaiv in South Ukraine, and the country's second largest city, Kharkiv. Odessa in the south is still being defended by Ukrainian forces, and the 64-kilometer-long Russian armored convoy is still sitting outside of Kyiv for reasons unknown. More than 2 million people have fled Ukraine and sought refuge in neighboring states. Attacks on civilians have increased in the last week. The civilian death toll stood at 474 on Tuesday, which is said to be a gross underestimate. Late Monday night saw a nighttime airstrike on the city of Sumy, which killed 21 civilians. There was also an attack on a bread factory near Kyiv, which killed 13 civilians. The WHO has said that attacks on hospitals and healthcare facilities have been increasing. Notably, the international humanitarian law says that during times of armed conflict, attacking medical facilities and civilians constitute war crimes. On Tuesday, Russia announced the creation of humanitarian corridors out of 5 cities, of which the one leading out of Sumy was honored. About 5,000 people fled the city on Tuesday. Around 700 Indian students stranded in Sumy were also evacuated using this corridor. The corridors remain open on Wednesday too, but Ukrainians remain skeptical. They've accused Russian troops of shelling on the route out of Mariupol, which, by the way, has been cut off from electricity and water and food for days now. Over the last week, we saw all major card companies like Visa and MasterCard and other businesses cut down operations in Russia, including the likes of luxury brands like Prada. After cutting Russia out of the international banking system, the next major effort in hurting Russia is refusing its energy supply. NATO countries discussed if they could cut imports of Russian gas and oil. Europe is way too dependent on it, so Biden went ahead and banned import of Russian oil unilaterally in the US. Moving to support Ukraine, the World Bank set up a $723 million package to provide critical facilities, welfare programs, and pay medical staff in Ukraine. Also last week, President Zelensky signed a decree allowing visa-free entry to foreigners to encourage supporters to join the fight. Around 20,000 people have shown up in this voluntary military force so far, including one Indian. Sainikesh Ravichandran is a 21-year-old from Coimbatore who was studying aerospace engineering in Kharkiv and is now part of the force. In an update on international relations, China is censoring its media to toe the party line in saying nothing against Russia. It's even scrubbing its internet off any accurate or sympathetic coverage of the invasion. This includes deleting comments expressing support for Ukraine or anything anti-Russia.
I'm not even really surprised anymore. I mean, considering it's 2022, beyond the realities of hard military aggression, which we've been seeing and you've described, another realm of the war is, of course, played out on the internet. From cyber attacks to disinformation to questions of whether big tech ought to block information in Russia, to online censorship, to patchy internet accessibility, it's all a part of the war today. Russia is infamous for its abilities to wage cyber warfare. It has one of the most capable and technological militaries on the planet. In 2015 and 2016, hackers thought to be under orders from the Kremlin caused power cuts to Ukrainian cities. In 2016 as well, the country's internet research agency ran disinformation campaigns to amplify propaganda about the US election. So yeah, they're pretty good at what they do. But this time around, while the whole world was nervously waiting for the next big cyber attack, the reality has been far from successful. On the other hand, Ukraine has managed to cash in on sympathetic volunteer hackers that has led to an unprecedented collective global effort to make the Kremlin pay for this unprovoked war. To top it up, the global Fave leader, President Zelensky, has put out a number of selfie clips reassuring the Ukrainians of his intention to stay, motivating them to fight, and basically, he's got the memo.
Yeah, he's got it.
These videos have done a great deal to rally international sympathy, from pushing for foreign policy action to international sanctions, to getting even non Ukrainians, like you pointed out, to join the fight. His videos have 100% been a hit. Moscow, however, is still yet to admit defeat on the information front and is going hard, at least within the borders of its own country. It passed a new law last Friday that essentially criminalizes the publication of information contradicting the government's statements on its ongoing invasion. The authorities have also decided to block access to websites like Facebook, Twitter, and BBC so that they can control the information that their citizens consume. They've even gone to the extent of creating propaganda cartoons aimed at children. So, yeah, they've been going, like I said, really hard at it. And yet, Ukraine has fought back. One of the most interesting yet grotesque fightbacks has been over the death of Russian soldiers. For a very long time, the Kremlin refused to even acknowledge their slain soldiers. And even when they did, it began with a very vague, oh, our soldiers are fighting valiantly, which was followed by a second confirmation with numbers that seemed like a woeful undercount, to say the least. As of when we record, US officials estimate that between 2,000 to 4,000 Russian troops have been killed, whereas Russia's most recent acknowledgement came on March 2nd and was at only 498 deaths. Anticipating something like this, Ukraine decided to launch a website called 200rf.com. A content warning for anyone who is intrigued enough and is going to look. It is an extremely grotesque website, and I'll describe what it is. It's a website meant to help Russian families track down information about soldiers who may have been killed or captured, which involves images, videos, and other details. It was developed by the Ministry of Internal Affairs and is a grim reference to Cargo 200, which was a military code word that was used by the Soviet Union to refer to the bodies of soldiers put in zinc-lined coffins to be transported away from the battlefield. Essentially, a euphemism for troops killed in war. Now, what seems or is packaged like a goodwill measure saying, oh, we're going to let the Russians know about their family, is nothing but psychological warfare that allows for the Russian disinformation bubble to pop. As the war wages on, it's going to be increasingly scary to see how this aspect of the conflict evolves.
And speaking of governmental messaging, let me spin this in a completely different direction and bring us home. I'm talking about Operation Ganga. It's been hailed as the most active citizen evacuation operation in Ukraine. And on Tuesday, the last group of Indians, mostly students, were evacuated from cities like Sumy. And there's been a lot of backpatting that has happened over the course of the last few days. And to give credit where it is due, mostly for good reason. There's been an estimated 18,000 Indians who have been brought back safely. However, it's not been all rose-tinted glasses from back in February. There was talk of emergency evacuations that began making the rounds, I think, mid-February, when the threat of war was not as imminent. And reportedly, the Indian embassy in Ukraine asked all Indians in the country to register on its website. So it had an estimate of the numbers in case of an evacuation, and about 20,000 registered, but thousands more did not. On the flip side, opposition leaders and some students have criticized the center. Rahul Gandhi has gone on to say, and I quote, evacuation is a duty, not a favor. So the opposition says the government was too busy campaigning and not paying enough attention to the operation, while some students have said that the whole operation could have been executed better. And there's this now infamous video of the mayor of Snagov arguing with the aviation minister, Jyotiraditya Scindia, which, makes the latter claim of the student unsurprising, because that video shows the mayor and our aviation minister arguing. The mayor went on to give an interview saying that Scindia was full of himself, arriving with cameras and speaking as if the evacuation was a PR moment. And I've seen similarly weird sentiments floating around the internet. One tweet criticized the student for being on their phone whilst I believe it was India, was apparently talking to everybody on the way back to India. And obviously, evacuation operations can't be done just because, the government is generous, despite the attitudes of some of our ministers. But India has previously evacuated people stuck in Kuwait and Libya during wartime, all of which comes as a test of our country's diplomatic ties with different nations. And for good reason, our foreign policy has a particular place for Indian expats worldwide. There's an op ed also in the Hindu that goes as far as to argue that all our UN votes, where we have abstained, is partly because the government does not want to be seen as criticizing Russia or antagonizing Ukraine, to focus on the safety of its civilians. Now, I'm not sure what to make of that claim, but just looking at our foreign policy and how our government messaging has been packaged, the entitlement of this of the people overseeing this operation, which is so important, makes it all the more baffling, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. But I also wonder if things are going to change. I mean, this op-ed is claiming that our stand in the many votes, the UN votes, has been to secure safety of our nationals in Ukraine. I don't think it's going to change now that everyone is back. Foreign policy is not just determined for Indian safety in Ukraine. There's so many other things that are playing right now.
I think, like, at the time, maybe to give some space for this argument, that maybe at the time it would seem like the most important aspect. But also, like, what I remembered from what you said is there's, like, I think 2,000 or more students still stuck in Belarus. And I don't know if there have been evacuation plans that have been made yet for them, right?
Yeah, we don't know yet.
So I assume the vote will stay the same until we get those people out.
Yeah. In any case, humanitarian corridors are things that should remain regardless of whose side you take in the armed conflict.
Correct.
On that note, we come to the end of our first segment. We'll be right back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcasts Network.
Eventually, you'll see the end of your childhood.
Get accustomed to womanhood.
Enjoy the experience of sisterhood.
Might get to wifehood.
Or not. Choose motherhood.
Or not. You'll learn to define your personhood.
Earn a livelihood.
Change the neighborhood.
And get rid of the falsehood that life post-academia is easy.
So join me, Ritasha.
And me, Ayushi.
On a journey from station starting point.
To station, what now?
Next station, Pudil station. And hopefully, Agla station, adulthood.
Fresh episodes out every Thursday.
Hello and welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcasts Network. We're Team Splainer, and make sure you follow us at SplainerIn on Instagram and Twitter to keep up with the Splainer fam. In today's Food for Thought, we're talking about the omnipresent plastic in our lives. To quote Janice Ian, cold, shiny, hard plastic. I don't know when I will grow out of this, but when you say the word plastic, my mind just straight up starts playing the plastics theme from Mean Girls, Pass That Dutch by Missy Elliott. Does it happen to you guys?
No.
Oh God. Am I too old for this?
I'm going to be playing this on repeat now that you've reminded me of it.
That is true. And for someone who claims that pop culture is not on point, it's 2 episodes in a row where you've made good references.
It's the Gen Z effect, I'm thinking.
No, it's always been there. It's just that don't get me into like Game of Thrones,
Okay, valid.
Okay, plastic.
Okay, yes, I digress. We are in a plastic crisis. Last week, nearly 200 countries got together to develop an overarching framework for reducing plastic waste across the world. A treaty to tackle plastic pollution, which is destroying habitats, harming wildlife, and contaminating the food chain. And most of our plastic trash ends up in the oceans, which is sort of our planet's last sink. In that context, we're looking at the Ocean Cleanup, a highly touted nonprofit based in the Netherlands that aims to clean up 90% of the ocean's plastic by 2024. 2 years away, by the way. The organization has raised $100 million on that promise. Now, how does it aim to clean up? It's built a 330-foot long floating barrier that kind of looks like a long pipe in the water. And it acts like a floating coastline that catches plastic in its fold like a giant arm. Then it has a permeable screen underneath that float that catches subsurface debris also. And it has a name, Jenny. It looks so simple that it's a little unbelievable. So I'm just going to link an explainer video on its tech in the description. It started out catching plastic in 2018, but the first prototype broke in the water. Next, in 2019, it did catch plastic. But it was thought to be too small to clean the world's oceans.
No
And then
shit.
came Jenny. Jenny is much bigger. Between August and October last year, Jenny performed its final tests in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in the North Pacific Ocean and hauled 9,000 kgs of trash out of the ocean. And then in February, the Ocean Cleanup put out a clip that a group of marine biologists have questioned as being staged.
From Sindhya to the Ocean Cleanup Project. Videos seem to be where they're going wrong.
At least we have videos. I mean, can you imagine wartime without like media?
That is true. I mean, the whole disinformation bit, it would have actually worked in Russia's favor if we didn't have so much information and so much media, multimedia.
Yeah. So anyway, back to the ocean cleanup. The clip shows 8,400 pounds of plastic being hauled out of the ocean, but then the marine biologists thought it looked too clean to have been in the ocean for a while. And it should ideally have had more visible buildup of algae and barnacles. And then the ocean cleanup, on the other hand, said that the water lacked nutrients for life to grow. I mean, which also sounds a little bit valid to me, but was also, again, later countered by marine biologists. But I don't know what is true anymore. Is the ocean cleanup project too good to be true?
So one of my favorite tweets from one of the biologists that debunked these claims was one of these scientists said, anybody with access to Google Scholar will know that this is not true. And but despite all of that, now that we read, it makes sense. But like most, I thought that the ocean cleanup folks seem to have the right idea. Cleaning up.
I mean, who would give them $100 million if they just like Googled it once and like found out from Google Scholar that it's not true? Like, really? That's your due diligence?
I feel like this is a great plug for Splainer. Please check out Wednesday's Splainer. It's about Theranos and it's about an equally big scam.
I was going to continue, but I'm so impressed with that segue. I'm just going to need a minute.
Thank you.
No, but coming back to plastic, on the surface, it seems like a really good idea. Cleaning up oceans is something that we need to do and pronto. Or that's what you'd think, because we see all these pictures of birds drenched in oil and turtles choking on plastic bags. But cleaning free-floating plastic, or at least the way we seem to be doing it, isn't the right way to go about it. So let's look at the numbers. For starters, there's an estimated 8 million metric tons of plastic that apparently finds its way into the sea each year. But guess what? We only find maybe 1% of this huge amount in our waters. One reason for this is that most plastic either breaks down into microplastics once it is in the water, but more often than not, our plastic deposits like fibers from our clothes are already in microplastic form before they hit the deep sea. The question that then arises is, what of the macroplastics? We can't actually account for these. Scientists call it dark plastic because we just don't know where it goes. Obviously, there's like a bunch of pictures of the ocean cleanup crew pulling out entire fishing nets full of buckets and toys and bottles and whatnot. More on that later, but that's what I imagine most of us think is floating around in the ocean. At least I did, but one hypothesis is that all of this probably sinks to the ocean floor, or at least, the portion of the waste actually makes it to the open seas. Scientists say that the rest of our plastic waste, which is, I believed that this is what was floating in our oceans as well. But one hypothesis is that most of this, or at least the part that makes it to the actual open seas, sinks to the ocean floor. Scientists say that the rest of our plastic waste, which is apparently between 70 to 180 million metric tons, is probably on our beaches and shorelines, either just floating about or trapped under rocks. Now, on to the great garbage patch. The name might make you think of a literal patch of garbage or a garbage island floating merrily in the ocean. Uh, this is how a Walkspace from earlier this month describes it. The so called patch isn't so much an island as it is a soup, however, in which broken down pieces of plastic are like pepper flakes. Much of the waste is pea sized or smaller and floats below the surface. A quick apology here to Vagda and any of our listeners who feel queasy about equating garbage with soup. But I think, it illustrates the point really well. And as for what we think are actual islands of garbage, most of those are called Newstons, actually. These are mini ecological systems that house diverse and sometimes rare collections of marine life. And what's disturbing is an organization that's cleaning up surface debris. The ocean cleanup reports don't mention these Newstons even once. And, I'm not saying in any shape or form that there is no excess plastic in our environment and that we should abandon cleanups completely. Because, like, every so often we hear about whales, for example, that end up on beaches with scary amounts of plastic in their bodies. But one has to wonder, is this a way to self-soothe climate anxiety? And are we really focusing on the right aspect here?
And self-soothe climate anxiety at $100 billion. Now, in addition to the success of the ocean cleanup project itself being pretty questionable, scientists have also time and again pointed out that beyond the hype of clearing so-called garbage patches, yes, the 1% of plastic that is in the macro form, the method of cleaning itself is actually harmful to marine life. Simply put, the process is very, very similar to trawl fishing and thus can accidentally catch marine life and cause harm to it. It is quite difficult to gather free-floating plastic without ensnaring fish, turtles, and other animals, who, FYI, often die in the process, even if they return to the waters. So now a scientist at the Ocean Cleanup Project does clarify that their approach is the complete opposite of fishing, mostly because he points out that the net is way more shallow and is moved slowly, so as to allow fish to move underneath it. But he did add that the project had indeed caught a small amount, yes, an undefined small amount of marine life.
Oh my God. When I was studying, the model of how it works, that's this structure, I was just thinking the screen underneath is just like, how is it going to prevent like fishing? How is it going to?
Exactly.
This is ridiculous. I did not read how they have actually caught a small amount of fish or
small
animals. Oh my God. Ridiculous.
Of marine life in its nets in the past, which included sea turtles. And then they also claimed that the sea turtles were already dead, but make of that what you will. And the problems don't end here. On the outset, while ocean cleanups do seem like a great idea, after all, the oceans make up more than 70% of our planet, and we have basically trashed them. And to put it into more perspective, the world dumps a whopping 8 billion kilograms of new plastic into the oceans annually. So, if it's only about the marine life, I'm sure some scientist somewhere can figure out a system that only captures waste, right? Even the Ocean Cleanup Project claims to be bettering its system to be able to do so. But here's another problem. It turns out the world's resources have been unequally focused on cleaning up plastic that's already in the ocean, which, according to scientists, is actually completely impossible to clean up. And thus, the real solution ought to be in reducing and eventually stopping the production of stuff that causes this pollution in the first place. A scientist in Gizmodo explained it with a pretty good metaphor. If you walk into your bathroom and your bathtub is overflowing, do you turn off the tap or do you get a mop? So the issue is a matter of scale. And thus, we can never catch up with the waste. We ought to first try and stop the source and only then refocus on cleaning up the mess.
Yeah. Okay. On that note, we come to the end of this segment. We'll be right back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcasts Network.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On This Round is on me. Gauri has a conversation on building a sustainable luxury travel ecosystem with entrepreneur Jaisal Singh. On the Wire Talks, Siddharth asks American philosopher Jason Stanley to decode his book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. On The Longest Constitution, Priya explains the concept of invisible work and how Javed Akhtar and the copyright law are connected. On Postcards from Nowhere, Utsav tells us an interesting story that connects West Indies cricket, jackals, and Mariamman temples. And on All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk look into the Ukraine-Russia conflict and its associated geopolitics. So, on a personal note, I wanted to let you all know that this week marks the 7th anniversary since I started IVM. I'm eternally grateful to the team we have here, especially Kavita Rajwade and Tejas Sringarpure, who have been here since the beginning. They've seen the struggles, our eventual acquisition by Pratilipi, and our continued struggles to make podcasting a large and thriving part of the media industry. We have the best hosts in the world, and I have to say that I'm so glad and so grateful that they have chosen to work with us. And finally, I'd like to say thank you to you, the millions of folks who have heard or watched our content. All I can say is, you ain't seen nothing yet. I hope you join us as we continue this journey. In the meanwhile, do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any platform you're listening to. You can also check us out on YouTube. To get a list of all of our channels, you can go to ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, where you can go to all the channels. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week: SBI Life Insurance, Bank of Baroda, Max Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and HDFC Life Insurance. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcasts Network. It's time for our final segment this week, Roast or Toast.
I'm back with least fave, as always. I could not. So a recent study of paleontology has found that 88% of discovered fossils are now housed in foreign museums. And as many as 59% of publications were led by foreign researchers. Basically, paleontology and archaeology have a colonization and gatekeeping problem, which of course is sort of common knowledge because a certain country keeps refusing to return a certain diamond. Or the British Museum that has artifacts from, everywhere without permission. Now, I'm sure barring the numbers, this was common knowledge, but any chance to dunk on the British Museum is a good thing in my book.
So is this a fave or a least fave?
No, see, to stay on brand, I have to say this is least fave.
All right, got it. My fave item this week is from our Wednesday edition, and it's dedicated to all the single folks, mostly men. If your dating app is not working for you and you've even tried the paid version, try putting yourself on a billboard.
Wow.
First, this man, Muhammad Malik from Birmingham, rented billboards to advertise his search for Mrs. Right. This was about, in January. Now, Jeevan Bhachu, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, Bhachu, has launched a similar Find a Wife campaign, but on train platforms in London. And the best part is what he wrote on it. So it has a picture of him kind of lying down and pointing towards some text. And the text says, "Best Indian you'll take away."
I can't even be mad. That is so clever.
It is. Now, while studying this story, I found that Malik's ad, the first one in January, wasn't actually his.
Oh?
It was actually a Muslim dating app, Muzmatch, that was
What?
behind the ad.
Really?
Yeah. If you went to the website in Malik's ad, which is findmalikawife.com, it would basically tell you to download the app, the Muzmatch app.
What
Huh.
about those 3 women who really wanted Malik, man?
I guess they're just disappointed and they have to download the app. Anyway, Jeevan's ad is very much his own. I visited his website where he makes it very clear that the pink suit he's wearing on the ad is something that just happened and his favorite color is not pink.
You would think the opposite. The website is so pink.
Yeah. I have so many thoughts. First, it seems like this is just South Asian men doing this shit. And second, I'm curious if this showed up in India, what the ads would look like. Where would we mention, the bride needs to be non-Manglik, or for a boy who is well settled and has a 6-figure salary? And how would you say caste no bar, but only in upper caste?
Also, homely women.
I think homely women is still there in Jeevan's ad, by the way.
Oh, no.
I think. I'm not
Jeevan.
entirely sure. But it sounded very similar.
I think the wackest thing from school, I'm going to come back to this, in CBSE, in 10th or 11th grade, we, as part of English writing skills, we learned how to write a matrimonial ad.
What?
I'm not making this up. It's part of the CBSE syllabus. How did you not do this?
What happened to CBSE after I left?
Yeah. I never wrote a matrimonial.
Was my school playing with me?
I think that was just your school, man. It was raising good girls.
But no, it was then in like pre-board papers and stuff, yeah.
That was just your school. That's a pre-board. It's just your school.
Just your school.
I'm gonna look this up and get back. Anyway, now that Prafula is back, I finally don't feel the pressure to be the grumpiest person. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And yep, I'm actually a closeted optimistic, y'all, because I do have a fave item and it isn't technically news, but in the general realm of it. In case you were living under a rock, you may have missed Times Now anchor Rahul Shiv Shankar being schooled by a certain Mr. McAdams. It is the single greatest thing to come out of the internet this past week, and I take absolutely no questions. Please, please, please do yourselves a favor and watch it right away. I'm going to link it. And for all of those who've actually seen the glorious clip, here's a bit of interesting news. We carried a new research that suggests that the glass half full kind of people, aka the ever so optimistic kinds, may actually live longer, healthier lives. The reason? They have fewer stressful events in their daily lives. So yeah, I guess I need to embrace this optimistic life more so often, have more fave items, just be happier in life. Maybe I'll live.
But I am Mr. McAdams. And that was our show this week. Thank you so much for joining us on Press Decode. You can catch us every Thursday on the IVM Podcasts Network. And guys, please remember, don't let the news give you the blues.
सफर, रास्ते, मंजिल और मुकाम अक्सर ये हमसे कुछ कहना चाहते हैं, पर हम हैं कि अपनी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में इन्हें सुनने से कतराते हैं। नमस्ते दोस्तों, मेरा नाम है केशव चतुर्वेदी और मैं आपको ले चलूंगा कुछ ऐसे सफर पर जहां आपको एक नया नजरिया मिलेगा सफर और मंजिलों को देखने का। आइए इन किस्से कहानियों में डूब जाएं, हर मंगलवार और शुक्रवार।
If you're a cricket fan, check out Edges and Sledges, India's favorite cricket podcast.
The podcast focuses on Indian cricket, the IPL, and has a ton of banter both on and off the field.
We talk about the week's biggest cricket stories with current and ex-international cricketers, coaches, or sometimes just between us.
And it's hosted by me, DJ.
Me, Varun.
And me, Ashwin.
New episodes release every week.
You can catch us on the IVM Podcasts website, app,
or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.